What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Horror Show. I'm Cecil Laird.
I'm Marcia Parker.
And we are here to talk about Grave Encounters 2. Now, we just actually recorded our review for the first movie, which was a patron request by the poll. It was a poll request one month. Now, actually, SK is the one that requested the sequel.
Okay.
I think he saw that we were going to do the first one and was like, yeah, I want to see them talk about the sequel too. And I can see why after watching this, because I was worried. I didn't remember the sequel very much at all. Mm-hmm. I remembered the first one more because I'd seen it one extra time. But the second one I'd only seen once when it first came out. And I remembered liking it because I got both movies, but I just didn't remember enough about it. So luckily, and this is just giving my overall impressions because that's how we normally start our reviews, I still really enjoyed this. And I actually think I might have enjoyed it a little bit more than the first one in some aspects, because they really go balls to the wall. They sequelize this in the way that sequels are bigger and badder and more kills and more effects and stuff like that. And they really did do that with this. And I thought it was largely successful. So we're going to get into it, but those are my overall thoughts. How about yours?
I thought it was good. I didn't think it was as good as the first one was, but I thought it was a really decent sequel. They paired really well because it was a continuation of the story, and it wasn't like, you know, a reboot, or it wasn't like a completely separate story that had nothing to do with the first story. So I thought it felt like it belonged together, and you should watch both of them if you want the complete story, because you're not going to get it with only watching one.
Well, they did it very meta this time.
Yeah, it was very meta. It was funny because I know I've watched this movie, but I didn't start remembering it until they got back to the asylum, and then I was like, oh, okay, yeah, now I remember everything. And then I enjoyed it. I mean, I still enjoyed it. It was still fun. I just didn't have as much fun with it as I did the first one.
Gotcha. So this one was written once again by the Vicious Brothers, but they handed off directing to John Poliquin. However you say that. Forgive me, John. But I didn't really notice a dramatic shift or anything like that. But yeah, so this one was a different enough story where it actually kind of did what Human Centipede did with the first and second movie, but they did it first, where the second movie starts off with a bunch of YouTube vloggers talking about the first movie. And again, this second one takes place 10 years later, even though it only comes out 1 year later in our time. So it takes place 10 years later. There's these vloggers, and one of them in particular, is only kind of so a fan on the movie, but he gets an email from someone that, has a mysterious screen name that starts sending him little bits of information about Grave Encounters, because they frame it as though, yes, this was a Hollywood movie that was put out, and all of these guys are reviewing it, and some people liked it, and some people didn't. And ironically enough, if you didn't know and you haven't watched it in a while, if you are in our sort of horror YouTube circle, then you'll know who Mike and Jay from We Watched a Movie are. And they just crossed 100,000 subscribers on their channel, actually. But they are actually two of the guys sitting talking about the first movie at the very beginning of Grave Encounters 2.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it doesn't have any channel logos or anything, but I saw them. I was like, holy crap, that's Mike and Jay. And they're like talking just a little bit about it. Yeah. And I was like, wow, that's crazy that they were in the movie. I didn't have any idea about that. So it was a funny little treat. So if you're a fan of We Watched a Movie, go check this out, and you'll see them in there. In their 2011 bodies.
That's funny.
But yeah, so they're all reviewing the movie, so it takes place in our reality, and that's what happened in Human Centipede as well.
Oh, okay.
Where there was a guy that was obsessed with the movie The Human Centipede, and so he tried to do his own Human Centipede. So this is kind of like that, except that in this one, Grave Encounters was a movie, and one of these YouTube vloggers is now getting these tips about the actual production, and eventually gets coordinates to get to the actual asylum that's not called the asylum name that it is in the first movie, but they go and sneak an interview with the producer that starts the first movie, talking about how this is just, we received these tapes, nothing's been doctored, and he basically says, you're never gonna get access to this information, it all was real, but no one's ever gonna find out. And so this kid, who is a 21-year-old film student, that gathers his group of friends to go and try and prove that this is real, that Grave Encounters was actually a real phenomenon. And so they go to the asylum, and then unfortunately for them, they start to befall the same fate of the first film crew from the first movie.
Really quickly, too.
Yes. But there is an interesting twist in that, and this isn't really a spoiler because it happens about, maybe halfway to 2/3 through the movie. They realize that the host from the first movie is still alive 10 years later and living like a hobo and like completely nuts and stuff. So that's the story, and the kids are starting to get picked off one at a time. So it's a little bit more tropey in that it's a group of kids that are starting to get picked off by a supernatural force. But at the same time, it stayed in the vein of the first movie, especially, directly sequelizing it with the actors returning from the first movie and everything. Being it was only 1 year later, they could do that.
Right.
But yeah, I just enjoyed, once again, I enjoyed the basic, wish fulfillment of the first one, and I enjoyed, following up on that world. They really did a good job, bringing me back and showing me more of what I wanted. So I really dug how the story played out. How about you?
I did too, and I thought they did like I said before, I thought they did a really good job aligning the two movies and really getting to the juice of it as quickly as they could.
Mm-hmm.
I think the college part maybe lasted a little too long for me, but once I got into the asylum, it was like balls to wall, and it was more of like kind of a mystery, like the two, because they were trying to figure out why this is happening, how do you get out, all of the details that do eventually get revealed in the end, and it does have a really good twist. So I thought they did a fantastic job keeping the suspense and then giving you a surprise at the end.
Yeah, and there's a bit of a Evil Dead 2 sort of homage kind of thing with how things play out. So
they got a lot going on in this one.
Yeah, they do. Some people might say they went too far doing a bunch of stuff, but I thought it was a proper bar raising from the first movie when you're doing old school horror movie sequel bar raising. You know what I mean? There's some people nowadays that'll make a sequel that I'm sure, for instance, the Quiet Place sequel that's coming out in a few months. I don't think that's going to be like the standard, horror movie sequel bar raise where there's going to be, thousands of creatures and big guns and all this stuff. I think it'll still be a more intimate affair.
Yeah.
So I don't think that movies do it quite like this anymore in the horror genre all the time.
No.
So it's refreshing to see, and especially when it's done well enough that it's enjoyable. So now the acting, how did you like the acting? Because we went from a, late 20s group of filmmakers to now a early 20s group of college kids.
Yeah, the acting was okay. It wasn't as impressive, I think, with the second crew. Maybe just because they were all linear, so there was no layers with their characters. They're college actors that get thrown into something they didn't really believe in the first place, and then you're just kind of trying to dig your way out. And some of them didn't really have a chance to develop very well because they got axed pretty quickly, but there were some situations that I thought they did a really good job. When there was somebody who lost his mind, and he did a really good job with that one. But overall, I don't know. Maybe I don't know if it was just because the storyline wasn't as deep for a lot of the characters, or it was they just weren't as impressive.
Yeah, I could see that. I don't know that I have an answer to that question, but I could see how you'd be, this.
It's one of those. It's like it wasn't as strong, and I don't know if it's because they didn't give them the opportunity to be as strong, or they just were strong.
It wasn't quite as unique a situation for them to deal with. So we've seen other kids do this sort of thing numerous times before, whereas the last one felt a little more unique. So maybe that was probably just working against this one, unfortunately. But it didn't sink the movie by any stretch. None of them were like, "Oh, this person's so bad" or anything like that. No. So
I agree. I can agree on that.
Yeah. Now, what about the effects? Again, there were way more effects in this one. A lot more digital use too.
Yeah.
But there was some cool stuff as well. Like there was one kill that I won't say who or even genderize, but there was one person that was trying to run from an invisible force. And kind of gets away and is trying to kick it away, and gets close enough to the camera, and then just, it seems like the invisible force just kind of like crushes their head, and then slowly pulls them away when they can't fight anymore. I was like, geez. Like, there was a couple of really effectively brutal kills in this one.
Very brutal.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I thought that, the practical effects were great and enjoyable, but then when they got into the CG, I was just like,
yeah, it starts
why
to lose
even go there? I mean, you have to with the ghost or whatever.
Yeah, although I will say, I wasn't so brought out of it, because they did it, you know, found footage style and quick, you know, whip pans and stuff like that. There was one point where there was a little girl in this one, a little girl ghost sitting there brushing her hair, and like, she does the mouth thing, right, where she's like, rah! And like, everyone screams and runs. And in the first one, everyone screamed and ran, and that was it. But in this one, everyone screams and runs, and the camera whips back at one point, and she's like coming down the hallway after them, like, ah! And I was like, oh, Jesus!
Yeah.
Like, you know, they kept it going. Yeah. And again, the big, tall, lanky dude that crawls out of the thing, and he's also coming after them, like, I dug it, and I do think that while there was more CG, I don't think that it necessarily took me out of it any more than the first one did.
Yeah, not more than the first one, but maybe because there was a lot more, I noticed it more. It was the same level of CG.
Yeah. Okay.
So I mean, it didn't go down. It just didn't really go up either.
Same quality, but more of it will get you to notice it more.
Yeah.
That's true. Mm-hmm. That's a good point.
But it fit with the theme, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the other thing. Like, even though it was the same quality, it actually helped align the two stories, because if it was way better, then it would kind of like, when you wouldn't go back to watch the first one, it wouldn't match. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, they had no choice but to match it, in my opinion. So in that, I can respect that they kept it similar, because it matched up with the two.
Right. Now, the other thing that's kind of interesting about both of these movies, the first and the second, I didn't mention this in the first review, but it applies to both, is that when you're doing found footage, there's no score. Right? So there's no underlying music. You have to do your own tension building without the help of music. You do it with sound design and stuff like that. So sound design really matters in these movies. And I thought the sound design was really effective. I mean, it moved around as the camera was whipping around, and it was, or it felt like it was anyway, and the sounds we heard were scary and unnerving, and there was a lot of faint screams, which I love when those are used effectively, and they did that more than a few times, or more than a couple times, and I thought it was effective each time. So, sound design wise,
I mean, it felt like you were there. It felt like what you would imagine would be happening in a situation like that, and you know, to me, like, the music isn't gonna help you as much as the quiet, and then hearing the sounds, like hearing the people above you, and you know there's nobody there in the halls, and like you're saying, the screams, and just the doors closing, and all those different signals. Like, you're gonna feel that more in a quiet space than you would, like, if you're hearing the undertone of the music. So I thought it was really effective.
So yeah, guys, I think that's going to pretty much do it for our review of Grave Encounters 2. Thank you again to SK for requesting this movie. We are glad to have revisited both. Again, both part 1 and 2 are worth your time if you haven't seen them and you like found footage movies, or even if you only like the good ones. These are still 2 good ones in our opinion, so they're worth checking out. If you enjoyed the video, guys, click the like button and subscribe. Click that bell if you want to make sure you don't miss any episodes going forward. Thank you again to SK and all of our patrons for supporting the channel monetarily. If you want to become a patron and request movies like this for us to review, go ahead and click the link in the description box. But for now, that's it. I'm Cecil Laird.
I'm Marcia Parker.
And remember, stay scared.